welcome to Lead Live, reminding you of your personal genius and how you think in order to actualize what you desire. Welcome again to our Lead Live show. We are so pleased that you joined us. Be prepared to ask questions, to share comments, be prepared to be inspired, and to walk away with some tools that you can use to enhance your own personal leadership. I don't mean to be too subdued, because the gentlemen we have on as guests today are remarkable individuals, very humble, and thus the title of this show, Timeless Leadership, Growth Decade by Decade. Our gratitude to you for joining us. Today, we discuss the evolution of two remarkable leaders. These men have led on paths that many of us would benefit from traveling. Their commitment to social justice is unwavering. Their friendship is noteworthy, reflecting the power of what I call unconditional love. They live in spirit and thrive beyond challenges, leveraging family as they choose to add value to the lives of individuals, organizations, and society at large. We welcome you again with your questions, with your comments during this broadcast, as well as after this broadcast. So let me share with you a little bit about, and it's just a small tidbit of information about Dr. George Woods, Jr., MD, a licensed physician specializing in neuropsychiatry, board-certified psychiatrist whose current passion is to bring his depth of understanding of brain functioning and its impact on behavior to technological solutions in medicine, neuropsychiatry, and business. He's a recipient of a number of awards, including from his organization where he earned his medical degree, the University of Utah Medical Center. Dr. Woods also received the historic prize from University of Milan last year, July 2019. He is president-elect again of the International Academy of Law and Mental Health. He served as Secretary General to the International Academy of Law and Mental Health during its amalgamation with the Institute of Ethics, Medicine, and Public Health at the Sorbonne, Paris, France. Worked with legal teams dealing with complex criminal and civil litigation, many teams. Worked with Vulcan Industries, Microsoft, Walmart, among many others, on psychometrically and culturally competent employment testing procedures. He's neuroscience advisor to Better Manager, a leader in advanced coaching for all levels of management. Senior consultant to Crestwood Behavior Health Incorporated, a major provider of behavioral health services. And he was appointed to the governing board of the Stanford University Medical Care Shared Services Program, University Health Alliance Accountable Care Organization. Here are some of his quotes. I want you to think about them because we're going to come back to them later on. Chance favors the prepared mind. Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. Not everything that counts can be counted. In the end, we will not remember the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. Now let's switch to John Burris, Esquire, a civil rights lawyer for almost 40 years. This University of California at Berkeley law student foundation trained attorney has represented over 1,000 victims of police misconduct and thousands more in class action, employment, and toxic tort cases. Additionally, he has advised and represented defendants in many serious criminal cases. His clients have included an array of high-profile public figures and professional athletes, including, not limited to, Rodney King, rapper Tupac Shakur, singer Dwayne Wiggins, and many hundreds of victims of illegal search warrant cases, as well as over 40 African Americans subjected to unconstitutional public strip searches. I'm going to go through his, my goodness, lengthy bio to reference that he also represented the Oscar Grant case, who was killed by BART police officer that has led to that award-winning film, Fruitvale Station. He represented a homeless woman who was beaten by the CHP officer on a freeway in Los Angeles. He represented over 20 Southeast Asian women who were sexually harassed by Oakland police officer. He settled several high-profile police misconduct cases, including a $5.2 million on behalf of John Hernandez against the Sacramento Police Department for its officers' use of excessive force, including tasing, baton strikes, leaving Hernandez with permanent brain damage. I can go on. He's also represented professional athletes, Gary Payton, Keyshawn Johnson, Barry Bonds, Jaylen Brown, Jason Kidd, Latrell Sprewell, Kevin Durant, also sports agents, and the San Francisco police officer, Chief Earl Sanders, when the San Francisco grand jury indicted the entire police department's command staff. This man has a legacy that has led to many awards, including more recently the National Bar Association, where he was inducted into the Hall of Fame for exemplary work in the area of civil rights. He's founding board member of the National Lawyers Guild, National Police Accountability Project, other board leadership, and he's a frequent lecturer, speaker. He's an author. A book, Blue versus Black, Let's End the Conflict Between Police and Minorities. He's a commentator on various cable television programs. This is just what he's doing with us today is remarkable because the man is literally sought up all the time. One thing that he has in common with his good friend George is he's married. And in this case, he's married to law professor Cheryl Amana Burris, and they have a blended family of 9 children, 19 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. I didn't mention George's family. I am certain that he's going to share because I have a question with him about his lovely family. So before we start with one of my 2 questions I'm going to ask them today, in addition to receiving your questions and comments, I want to ask them to join me right now. I've given you the tip of the iceberg in terms of the legacy that they built and that they are building. And so I'm going to ask both George and John to join us and share one at a time a little bit of information about themselves that you won't find online that helps to make them who they are. So join us, George and John. Thank you. How are you both?
It's great seeing you. Thank you for having us, Elnora.
It's a pleasure. So George, maybe you can share something with us that we would not normally know about you.
That's a very difficult thing. I think the most relevant thing to what we're talking about now is the fact that I turned down the first opportunity that I had to go to medical school. And I'd never planned on going to medical school. I thought I would just get a job out of college, and I was given an opportunity. And I think I was afraid of the challenge. Mm-hmm. And I turned it down and instead did something that in the long run served me well. I became a salesman for IBM and sold computers for IBM here in San Francisco. And it was really my manager at IBM. I was a pretty good salesman, and it was my manager at IBM that was talking about what have you done and what are your plans. And I mentioned to him that I had been accepted to medical school, and he looked at me and he said, you know, it's always good when you can work for yourself. He said, if you just love IBM so much, you can always work at IBM, even as a doctor, right? We hire doctors, but he said, you know, you have an opportunity to work for yourself, and you should think about it. And I did, and within a short time, I reapplied and went to medical school.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Think about that, those of you who are viewing. Think about life trajectory, choice, the power of choice, the power of listening to someone who reminds you of your choice. John, can you join us and share something with us that we would otherwise not know? John's going to join us in a few moments. I think we have some technical difficulties, which happens. And so in the meantime, I am going to ask you to explain what you meant by the quote that I shared earlier. So I'm going to go back up a little bit. And hopefully John will be back with us in a few moments. Chance favors the prepared mind.
Yes, I first need to make it clear that these are not my words. I don't want to get to.
You borrowed them.
You're right. I borrowed all of them, and I am a borrower. I will tell you. I believe that when you see things that can make a difference, you don't always have to be the one that thinks of them. You're not always the one that has to be the author. You can often be the editor. You can be the reader, and take those words. But this was really an important one for me. This was a quote that I felt was about being prepared, right? And for me, this quote replaces luck. It explains to me what are the qualities of luck, right? What are the qualities of being at the right place at the right time? You know, what are the qualities of serendipity? This just happened. I do believe that things can just happen, but that's not the essence of being successful. Being successful is being able to take advantage of those things that just happen. Right. And so if you're not prepared, the fact that you're lucky or the fact that you are in the right place at the right time, or the fact that chance comes your way, is not relevant. That's really what that quote means. And to me, that's a part of leadership, you know, is recognizing when that moment comes and you can truly take advantage of it and move it to the next step.
Powerful. Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. What do you mean by that?
This is a very personal one for me, because I have to constantly tell myself to slow down. And I have to constantly tell myself to attend. That attention is a quality. It's not just a cognition. It's a quality. And when you attend, people respond to it. I often see, I'll be I'll be walking as you and I do, and with John, I'll be walking and I can't smile anymore the way that I used to, but I'd smile at someone and they would look at me and then they'd smile. At first, they kind of go, well, what are you doing? What are you doing? Well, I'm trying to pay attention to that person. And it can change things. It's generous. It's easy. And yet it's a quality that really connects you with people very easily.
It reminds me of the word attitude. I always tell my clients, and whenever I get an opportunity with people, I say, one of the most magical words, if not the magical word, is attitude.
Right.
So your attitude is reflected in your behavior, right, and how you are towards the other. And it's so powerful. When someone says, oh my goodness, I feel so healthy and happy and everybody's healthy and happy around me. Well, it may not be that everyone's healthy and happy around you. That's what you're projecting. So you're receiving that.
That's right.
In the same way where, my goodness, I'm upset and everybody's upset. Well, everyone may not be upset. It may be you. Right. You're influencing the conditions. Right. And that's the power of that attention and the way you described it to me. The other one is not everything that counts can be counted. I think that's a powerful one. Just explain that.
Well, we certainly material goods are important and are relevant. However, we attach a certain weight to material goods that we don't attach to emotional valence. We don't weigh them the same. We weigh materialism as though it is real, and we often weigh emotionalism as though it is soft. Somehow it doesn't really fit into one's life. And I think one of the examples that we're seeing now, Elnora, that really changes this so much is what we're calling social determinants of health. And social determinants of health, even when you look at the genetics, even when you look at the science, we're now realizing that eating well makes a difference, that getting your sleep makes a difference, that not being isolated makes a difference. I mean, not just a little difference, but makes as much of a difference as what your genetic makeup may be. Right? As much difference as what your family health may have been. They're really that important. And you're finding companies like United Healthcare doing things like buying housing for people in North Carolina. United Healthcare just spent $100 million to create affordable housing in North Carolina because they're realizing I can give you all the pills and all the procedures, but if you have no place to take those pills, if you have no place to relax after you, then it doesn't matter. And so there are things that can't be counted, but that doesn't mean that they don't count.
That's powerful. Tomoko's online and saying hello, and Zerica says, I wholeheartedly agree, ! And then a smiley. And so as you were talking, what I want to add, my little contribution, and maybe you can speak to this a little bit further, even one's thoughts, the way one thinks, has a direct impact on their well-being. Absolutely. Can you speak to that?
Sure. When we talk about leadership, we're talking about the grooves that we make in our mind, right? We talk about reframing our tendencies. We talk about reframing our understanding of where we want to go. And these aren't, again, these aren't just kind of soft things. They're, when you look at the neuroscience of this, you really see that we're literally grooving our brain. We're creating muscle memory, right? And it's really just the way we think. the early parts of our brain, and I don't want to get too far into this, but the early parts of our brain, the brain that we're born with, are brains that are designed. It's a brain. It's called the amygdala, and it's designed to help us monitor our environment.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a stick or is that a snake?
Mm-hmm.
As we develop those understandings of our environment, as we developed how to use that monitoring, it becomes embedded in our brain.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why early childhood development is so important, because you want to embed those pathways of success early in childhood, rather than having to tear them down and recreate them later in life.
Which is remarkable. So I'm thinking about your children. I'm thinking about John's children. I'm thinking about everyone's children, and my many, many, many nieces and nephews, and godchildren. I'm thinking about people who have grown up in certain environments, diverse environments,
Right.
Those environments that affirmed who they were,
Right.
whoever they happened to be, that
Right.
said yes to them more than no,
Right.
that explained to them the reasons for that adult's perspective, behavior,
Right.
response, reaction,
Right.
more likely to be able to reason, use their critical faculties in productive and responsible ways than those children who were reared in environments, who are now adults, who can't listen, who are not open because they experience so much modeling that's imprinted on the basics of who they are at that unconscious level now, that no is the way to do.
Sure.
Keep the child.
Sure.
Don't listen. I'm the adult. Listen to me, and you only speak when I tell you to speak.
Sure.
And there are a lot of things that we learn to do, and we believe they're the most responsible thing.
Sure.
We don't understand why, fill in the blank. People are not engaged. People are not recognizing that they have voice, that they can ask questions, that they can create. In fact, that's who we are, right? At the essence, we're creators.
That's
Can you
exactly right.
explain that in terms of leadership?
Well, we are creators and we are created. Right.
Okay, explain that.
Well, let me kind of give you two quick stories.
Okay.
There's a wonderful show on that I'm watching right now on Netflix called College Behind Bars. And it's a story of young women and young men that are in prison that are going to college. And much of my work has been with people on death row around the country. We have a certain perspective on who these people are. But one of the questions that I ask many of these people, actually everybody that I interview, because I do a lot of what we call habeas work, and I see people that have been in prison 10, 20, sometimes 30 years. And I say to them, so tell me the difference between who came into prison and who is in front of me today. And it's amazing in order to get the responses, because so many of these young men and women came in at 16, 17. They committed horrific crimes. At 35 or 40, they can look back and they can say, who was that person? Right? Who was that environment? I mean, how did that happen? The idea that, and I think this to be, frankly, a fairly racist and culturally derived idea, the idea that all these young men and women are just gangbangers and their lives aren't worth, anything, and they can never turn themselves around. It's not true in the rest of the world, right? Where we see people that are able to do that. And a lot of it is because I've gone back to their teachers, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and they could say, and their teachers are able to say, I saw something then that I knew was hurtful. I saw it in their parents. And it reminds me of the second story, which is a story about Debbie Reynolds. And many people may not know who Debbie Reynolds is, but she was a movie star in the 50s and in the 60s. And I was traveling, and it just happened. I kind of an addicted reader, and I picked up her autobiography in an airport. And she was talking about the fact that she initially grew up in Texas, moved to California, was one of a number of children, was sexually abused, starting at a very, very early age, and sexually abused until she was much older, and came to California, became a movie star, and then started having these series of marriages. And she said after about her third marriage, she realized that when her gut told her to do something, that she should do just the opposite. You know, we all rely on our gut, right? We always think of our gut as the clue that tells us which way to move. But what if your gut has been shaped by trauma? What if your gut has been shaped by pain? What if your gut has been shaped by deprivation and issues of gender inequality and issues of race? If your gut has been shaped by those things, then you need to watch your gut.
Wow. Okay. Wow.
Well, it all leads to the awareness that in order to be a leader, you need to be aware. Right? You need to be aware. Right. You need
and aware of your environment.
Exactly right. And be willing to look inside yourself and see your strengths and see those things that may need work.
You stated also something that I've heard before. In the end, we will not remember the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. And I also want to acknowledge Tomoko said she wrote 16, 17, 18-year-olds in prison. They are so young. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, right. And they are children.
Yeah.
Right.
So maybe we want to come back to that. But in terms of that quote, in the end, we will remember the words of our enemies.
Right.
But not remember the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends.
Right. Well, this has been the history of, this certainly has been the history of the 20th century. And now we're moving into the 21st century. You know, this is the Quisling in Nazi Germany, right? We could even go back to, right, you know, to even slave times where, yes, unfortunately, it was true that there were African kings and queens that sold slaves to the slave trade. So there's always been that part that we have to take responsibility for. That we have to decide, is it time for me to stand up? If it is time for you to stand up, then are you going to do that? You don't have to, right? But if you don't, then you're taking away really what may make the difference in your venture. It is, yes, there are times when what someone else is doing is the factor that defeats you. More often, however, it is what you are doing that gives them what they need to take you down.
And that doing may be not doing.
Exactly right.
Alicia says, thank you for calling attention to the importance of emotional health during early child development. I couldn't agree more. And that's Dr. Alicia.
Right.
And so I hark back to Tomoko's comment about these kids
Right.
in prison for
Right.
committing unspeakable crimes.
Right.
And then the importance of functioning
Right.
adults supporting the health and well-being of children.
Right.
And I use the qualifier functioning adults. We're not trained to have children, and yet we can have children. Any of us.
Right. Exactly right.
We have a license to have children.
And you know, this I think this really speaks to my relationship with John, because well, you know, our
audience. Just quick note: we're trying to get John back on. There's an issue with the internet where he's located. It's completely gone down. So I think we may have a workaround, and John will be back. Will be with us in a moment. But
Okay.
Please speak to that, George, because I think this is a powerful story.
Well, you know, we live in Oakland, and I've lived all around Oakland. But one of the central parts was that I've always, for those of you that know Oakland, there's a lake here.
Oakland, California. For those of you who are in other countries.
Right, right, not Oakland, Michigan, right, or Oakland, Tennessee, they're all of those, right. This is Oakland, California. So in the middle of Oakland is a beautiful lake, Lake Merritt. And it's about 3.8 miles around, almost 4 miles, depending on how you take it. And it's really a drawing point for people that like to walk, like to run, like to congregate. And I met John many, many years ago, decades now, and we began to walk the lake. And we walked it literally every day, 5:30 in the morning. We would meet at the lake and we would start walking the lake. Much of those early conversations were about our children. We have daughters that are pretty much the same age. We would talk about every aspect, but where they were going to school, the issue.
1 second, George. I'm going to ask Jet and Raleigh to have John join us. He's back on. So
Great.
keep talking, and then we'll come back to introducing him.
So we would be talking about our children, where they were going to school, what was going on in their life, were there issues of race or gender that we would have to think about, how were they developing, what did we want for them, right? What did we want their lives to be? Is it time to let them go, right? Is it time to give them more freedom because they were taking it anyway, right? Right. And so much of our conversation for, I think, 20 years was really about, you know, our children and our family. And so, you know, we talked about early childhood development, you know what I mean? And we talked about our own development. We're both from relatively small towns, and we laughed about the fact that we may in fact be relatives because Oklahoma or Texas, you know, my mother's from Oklahoma. And so it really was about race. It was about development. It was about what does it mean to be a man. And, you know, and I don't mean that in the domineering, you know, I mean, really, what does it mean to grow up and be respectful to your spouse and to your children, to what does it mean to be a dad? These were conversations that shaped my life.
Wow. I want to ask you, John, to introduce yourself in a way that shares a story or a comment that we would otherwise not know, that reflects you or evidence why you're who you are. And then I want to have the conversation among the two of you because of your rich history and what you built together. Even though you have two businesses, you've helped each other create those businesses in some solid ways. John.
That's a very interesting question. Before I went offline, I was thinking about various aspects of my life that people do not know. And my wife often tells me the most significant aspect is my sense of humor. And I do have humor, and I tell jokes, and my grandkids, they love the corny jokes that I tell them, and their eyes get big as I tell them stories about the lions in the backyard or the police car in front. And, so I have a real sense of humor about things. I mean, obviously, I appear to be more serious than not when people see me in work, which is also true. But if I know you and you have a sense of humor, I really, that is an important aspect of my life. And I tell my wife that since we've been married for the last 20 years, that one of the things she did was bring back my sense of humor. She didn't know I was a funny guy. So she always is amazed that I say these funny things to her. And so that's probably significant. The most important thing that people do not know, in terms of just a personality trait. But I do have a sense of humor. But I am in terms of our relationship and my own development, I know I missed most of this, but I will tell you that part of my leadership, more than anything else, is a vision that I've always had about what I saw and what I wanted to accomplish in the course of my life. A lot of that is a function of childhood, watching the civil rights movement unfold, watching even John Lewis today brings back a lot of those memories that became deeply ingrained in my system. And everything I've done, for the most part, is the furtherance of that. Not every day, of course, but I've always had a real sense of moving the social agenda, because part of what I live by is W.E. Du Bois's talented 10th. And my view is the talented 10 have a responsibility for the other 90. And I view myself, given my accomplishments and my education, as being part of the 10. And that then says to me that you have a responsibility to impact the quality of lives of the other 90%, recognizing that the 90% people don't always see it. They don't always want to be moved. But you can do things that impact their lives so that they will never see it. There's a comment that George often says that I've taken to hold, and that is, we're planting trees that we will never see grow. And we're planting the seeds. And I tell people in one of the cases I finished, what I'm trying to do in this case is for the next 10 years, the kids who will walk the streets of Oakland will not know and will not be impacted by negative policing, because we have taken care of that. And that's my vision about what, and that's all, and that's fundamentally the whole time. Obviously, I'm trying to raise my kids and all that. And the thing that's most important, as George and I talk about, is we're trying to prepare them so that they can make the good decisions. And that requires grooming, teaching, allowing them to see the vision, but then also letting them grow. I sent my kids to college, and I've said to them, my daughters and my son, look, I've given you everything you need to know in order to make good decisions. It's up to you to make those decisions. Now, if you can't, call me. Call me. I'll help. But that's really kind of a philosophy that I have. And I've been fortunate to have several different types of careers, but I ultimately, after years, landed into the career that I had the vision for when I was a young man.
I'm thinking about part of the stories that you shared. And John, there was a statement that I think George referenced first, and then you explained it. And it was the statement, "Stars shine everywhere." I want to say that stars shine everywhere.
I was in Chicago as a young lawyer there, and I was doing quite well. And, I saw myself there moving along Michigan Avenue and places like that, and South Side and West Side. But I had to come home because my mother wanted me to come home because I had a son here. So there was a lady and there were a couple of people who looked after me when I was from California, looked after me. There was a judge who looked after me. There was a clerk, an older lady looked out for me. And so I go to her and I'm bemoaning that I got to leave. And what's wrong, baby? She would say to me, and I said, well, I got to go home. My mom wants me to come home, and she says to me, don't worry about it. Stars shine everywhere. And it made a lasting impact on me because I understood that wherever I'm going to go, the vision that I had will carry forward, and I can implement it wherever I am.
That is powerful. That is powerful. It reminds me of another statement that you made. It's the sense of being connected, and the importance of connectedness. And so can you speak to that? I mean, the nature of your relationship with George evidenced that. And maybe you can put your phone on mute.
Yeah,
John.
You're right, I did, yeah.
Okay. So can you speak to this, your sense of always being connected?
Well, growing up in a family of 6 and that had strong community connection. My family's from the South, like George mentioned. He's from Oklahoma. I'm from Oklahoma, and the families came out here and migrated. But part of that was, for me, was being part of a community. Being a part of a community was, first it was a family community, then it was a neighborhood community, and it was a religious community. It was all these family people that allowed me to stay grounded. And my father would always tell me that a rolling stone gathers no moss. So as I wanted to travel around, he would always remind me that a rolling stone gathered no moss. And that kind of caused me to settle. First I went to Chicago, but then ultimately I told you I had to come back. But I understood that I had to settle into a place and make my mark if I was going to make a mark in a location with a community of people. And so as a young boy, I was always actively involved. I became president of a number of different organizations, putting leadership out there. I started my firm, and part of the firm was to develop other lawyers, to be connected to the greater communities that I was part of. That was always significant. And to have basic friendships, good friendships. George and I have developed into the most personal of friendships, but there are others because I'm a member of 2 fraternities. And so these are all men fraternities so I've also had another issue, and that is trying to provide opportunities for people. I've had huge cases where I've employed 10, 20 people 30 people at a time, which is, a heavy indication, but it's also giving them an opportunity and allowing them to be able to have economics, but also have stability, also to work in an environment where you are comfortable. That has always been very important to me. Private entrepreneurship. My father and mother, even though they were workers, but they did entrepreneurial stuff. And I always understood that if you want to really make a decision and be strong here, you need to be able to control your own destiny. And for me, that was important. And that was my vision always, is to have social interaction, social justice, but also to be able to control my life in total.
And you have a legacy of mentoring young people and even bringing them into your home and inspiring them. I want to ask the question, you two evidence courage, and you speak about being courageous. And I know that, John, you talked about how your mom was courageous. And I'm reminded of a statement that you made, George. I don't know if Raleigh or Jet can pull it up. It's around the courage. It is to be courageous is a decision, and to learn from that decision and to allow yourself to be free in developing in your own development is part of the courage. Being courageous. Can you both speak to that? Because you function in a way that seems seamless without any kind of hiccups, and you just kind of know what to do. And George, you're testifying in a court, and you're responding to a judge's direction and others' direction with ease. You're giving a presentation, John, as you're advocating in a very seamless way on behalf of clients. You're giving presentations, both of you, to large groups of people in this country and elsewhere. How did you get there? When we think about decade to decade, how did you just get to the place where you're at right now, especially in an environment where we see how darker you people, Black people in particular, Black men even more specifically, are dismissed and neutralized, if not wholly negated?
Well, it's kind of interesting, and I'll start, George, real quickly. It's interesting because one not know, and my kids don't know this, but I never gave a speech until I was first year in junior college. I never spoke in front of a class. And because that's the environment it was. But I ultimately, as I went through, became very committed to ideals. And it really only happened after law school, really. When I walked into law school, that first day of law school, I said, this is it for me. And from there, it was a question of being able to incorporate my sense of what I wanted to be with what I had to go through to get there. And part of that was going through law school, but being tested. I've talked to George often about, we had a strike when I was in law school. I was the head of that group. And that was my first test of courage. That is, are you prepared to follow this all the way through, even though there might be risk to you, to your career? I mean, there was always this question of, that you could get kicked out and not survive. And I saw other people who did not survive, who did not display what I considered to be real courage at the time, even though it was about school. But so I've always had a real sense of having, if you believe in something, then you go do it. And there have been mentors I've had along the way. As one, Henry Ramsey, who was my professor, when I might have some issues about doing things, he would say, you got big shoulders. And I look around and see I had little shoulders, I thought. But it was philosophically, and I've always carried that. And I've been very fortunate because I have a very strong belief in what I'm doing. And the other thing is, you can't do anything about it. I mean, you can be upset with me all you want, but there's nothing you can do about it as long as I protect myself. And I learned early as a judge, Clinton White. I don't know if you were around here when Clinton White would walk the lands, if you will. He was a giant and he took me under his wing, and he would say, make sure they always respect you and don't let them define you. And because of that, I had many fights as a young lawyer because I was not backing down. And as a consequence of that, I developed a real strong sense of who I was as a lawyer and what I could do. And I saw the impact it had on people, and that so I knew I could get stuff done. And that's important. So I think it's the vision and commitment. And Henry would always say to me, he gives speeches, he said, you have a lot of courage. I never saw it that way. I didn't see it that way. I just see that's what I do. And I tell people, I'm fortunate I get to do it. I really get to do this, and that's the important part about it. And George and I talk about that all the time. We get to do it, Right. We just get to do it,
Wow. George?
Well, I think that I think it's important to understand that this is not easy. And to this day, it's not easy. And as I talked earlier about John and I talking about, our kids, and we also talked about our careers, right? And we talked about, where we were. And I've told John this before, I've really followed John in many ways in terms of his career, because no matter what your career may be, there are certain stages that one has to go through. You have to, number one, become educated as to what you're doing. Number two, you have to determine that it's what you want to do. Number three, you have to become good at it. Right? And then you have to practice, and I would watch John as he would develop these different steps where he would be downtown Oakland, and then his office might move, and he would bring on someone new. And I think about it and I say, does that make sense to me? Is this something I should do? It's not the same, of course, but these are the kinds of making decisions about one's personal life, right? So that you start making good decisions, and having someone that is with you in making those good decisions. Having a partner. I can remember when I developed diabetes and I stopped drinking, and I remember friends of mine. I'd go to a party, and they would know that I'd not be drinking, and they would, say, "Hey, man, well, you can just have one. You can just have two, right?" And so, I began over time to separate out who really cared about me and who didn't, right? They may like me, right? We may get along, but do you really care about me? Are you in my corner, right? And once once I saw that, John Burris was someone that was always in my corner, it allowed me to share in his success, right, and grow from his success, which added to my success. So,
Wow.
so I think that's it's important. You've got to allow yourself the mistakes. You've got to allow yourself the downfalls. I personally feel as though you learn more from the failures than you do from the successes. And
George has been more helpful than not. I mean, I think he's been a little more modest here. Much of what has taken place for me is since we met over a case, and I still talk about this case many years ago, where a young kid got shot and killed at Berkeley High, and I was looking to try to explain why this kid could do what he did, right? And I met George, and we developed a theory, and it worked. And he has been sort of my go-to person ever since in terms of helping define the damage side of a case, because every case is different, and helping me find people. And so we've had a lot of discussion around those, and as a consequence, I've learned a lot around that. But I don't know that one could not be enough gratitude and expression by a real personal friend. Don't know that you can be any better than that, because personal friends talk about stuff.
That's right.
And I'm, as I said, I'm a member of fraternities and stuff. I've been in frat stuff for many, many years, but I've grown in different levels along the way. And the frat people that I had at different stages were not significant in terms of my personal involvement as I grew. And I grew, and that happens to everybody when they go along. But and George and I have grown together in that sense, because we've been together all these years. I've had many friends that have fallen by the wayside that were friends, some of them in the past too. But I think that part of that is growth and acceptance, family involvement. All of that is helpful. So if I would say to people who are going to be leaders with visions, is you have to be able to step beyond yourself and share who you are with other folks, not limitlessly, but you got to have that vision, and you got to have that friendship, and you must communicate.
And
Otherwise, you're not,
And that's courage. Courage isn't just jumping up and, being able to take care of someone physically. Courage is just being protesting and, walking out there. That's great. But real courage is making these personal decisions about, I'm going to change my life. I'm not going to let somebody do that to me. I'm going to make that's really courage. And there are little things that lead to, so, John Lewis is heroism. That's not courage, right? That's being a hero.
But I'll tell you, courage is when you have to make career changes.
That's right.
I was in a partnership with my close fraternity brothers who were personal friends of mine. And for 6 years, I practiced with them. L.E. Harris and
Yes.
And these were personal friends of mine, frat brothers, the whole deal. But at some point, I concluded that if I wanted to be the lawyer that I had in my head or in my heart and my vision, I could not do it with them. And I remember how painful it was to tell them that I'm leaving. And I stepped out there with old wooden desks, old wooden typewriters, and just me. And I did that, and it was a huge decision, but it was the most important decision I've ever made, because what I'm doing now over the last 30 years or so, I could not have done it with that group, because the mental thinking was different. I needed people around me who thought the way I was thinking. Now, it turns out I have no one around me like that, because everybody's 35 years younger than me.
I want to come back to that, because that's powerful. Mindset. So much of this show is about mindset. I want to acknowledge Alana Ross's statement. Shout out to John Burris. With all of his many accomplishments, his humility is one of his most admirable qualities. I'm proud and honored to call him a friend. So exclamation mark. And that's the nature of why I have you on, because not only do you display a sense of humbleness, it's not a humbleness for the sake of humbleness. It's really in the face of being courageous, et cetera, et cetera. It's because you have a vision of who you are and a vision of where you're going. You can be sufficiently clear and comfortable in your skin where you don't have to be bombastic or otherwise in order for people to attend to you. You just focus, 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 and deliver. And so it reminds me of this mindset. And so, John, you knew what you wanted to do. You navigated. George, you didn't quite know. You leveraged others. But ultimately, as John said, you had early in your career, you wanted to be the master of your soul. John, explain that a little bit.
This is a very, my sister, who I have a big sister who's younger than me. I mean, everybody has.
Understand that.
Yes. She would always tell everybody that John doesn't want, Johnny L, what they call me, he doesn't really want to do any this kind of work. He wants to be a star. And I used to say to my sister, I tell her now, I don't think I ever said that. She said, oh, no, you did. But it really was, in my own sense, that having, that I wanted to be, I didn't want to be where I was. I didn't know precisely where I was going to go, but I did a lot of reading. And that was my entree into the real world was through books. Right. Well, we didn't have any money and stuff. So I read about Marco Polo. Hell, I want to go to China, right? Boulevard. I want to go to South America. But it was my window out to the world. And I tell people that's how it happened. But I also read all the stuff, and I watched all the great men that and the heroes during the 50s and 60s. And so I didn't know I didn't want to be, I knew I wasn't that kind of person, but I knew I could make a real contribution. And about it, and certainly there are missteps along the way. I will say that it hasn't all been peaches and cream. The work part has been good, but the personal history hasn't been great. It's been reckless at times, and I regret it. And if I could say to anyone, and I say to all the people, as you move along, watch your personal life, because your personal life can keep you from fulfilling your professional life, or it can pull you down. Right. So my big issue with people is. And I watch your personal life. I guess speeches. Watch your personal life. Watch the isms. Right. Alcoholism, drugism. These things will take your life in a direction that you had not planned. Right. And I saw this along the way up with many lawyers who went down because of the cocaine epidemic in the 1950s. And we see alcohol, and there's a huge determinant. And so there are a lot of forces out there that can pull you down and keep you from doing it. You have to be able to make good decisions. Right. Personal considerations are most important as well. Otherwise, you will be ruined.
Right. There's something that we talked about a little bit, and it really reflects the legacies that have been built and have been codified in systems and institutions that has led to a disproportionate number of Black and brown individuals. And when I say brown, I'm talking about Latinas, I'm talking about Native Americans, I'm talking about Pacific Islanders, I can go on and on. It led to remarkable health disparities, right. Remarkable homelessness, remarkable negative impacts due to coronavirus 2019 pandemic. I can go on and on and on. And of course, the policing state that we have now, so many people have so well written and linked it back to the so-called reduction of slavery and then so-called elimination of slavery, but it just transformed into this police state through the use of the prison industrial complex. I can go on and on and on. But from your learned perspective, how do we create, I'm not interested necessarily in staying in a vision state, but how do we take a vision for a better reality for all of us, inclusive of all of us, and actually have it transform the nature of our society? That's a big question. I don't mean it to be rhetorical. I really want some of your initial thinking, and I know it's one, so we've got to wrap it up soon.
We do there's a lot of protesting going on now. And I think it's all good except for the violence. But I also say, when I give a talk in Menlo of this, it says, look, I got it. You need different mechanisms to move the social justice agenda. Protesting is one of them. But beyond that, you have to have a vision of a plan. You have to, what do you really think you're going to get here? When you're talking about structural racism or structural racism in economics or education and all these things, these are significant, challenging issues. And I don't know, I have the answer to this. I'm dealing with the issues of policing, and even that is a challenge. So I don't know if we're too far gone on any of these other than the moving around the edges. Because if you listen to this report that came out by this mayor of Minneapolis several years ago, a liberal woman, a liberal city, so-called liberal city. And what she said is that the liberal people weren't really liberal when it came to really making substantive changes around the Black community. Right. They would give money for a program here, a program there, but not when it came to them having to give up something. In order for you to make structural changes, somebody has to give up something. And if you're not prepared to give it up, then you're not prepared to making the changes. So you can give your extra money, your tip 5% to somebody. But if you're talking about changing the educational system, maybe your kid can't go to that particular private school. And because of the competitiveness of all of this, I don't see people willing to give that up. What I see is the challenge is us that us trying to get these things, but I don't know. It's a bigger question for me. I just don't see. And I've been reading a lot of James Baldwin recently, and he really says, in essence, white people are not prepared to give this up, and the world can't change until the white people themselves understand that they have to give it up. It's not about us; we don't have it, but it's the white people who have it. And I don't mean that in any kind of negative way, but they have the majority of the goods. And if they're not prepared to give it up and or see the necessity for giving it up, it can't happen. And that's the unfortunate, as I see. That's a philosophical response to a very serious question.
Big question.
Well, let me just quickly say that, we are now afraid of things that we celebrate historically. We are afraid of the windows that are broken on Broadway, but we celebrate the tea that was thrown off the ship, revolution. And so it's all the same. It's all the same. You can't expect people to act rationally at all times in irrational times. And we are all going to have to pay for freedom. There's a price to be paid. And it's funny, we're having this conversation. I was talking to my kids a couple of days ago, and I was telling them that, I really, to the degree that they don't get involved in the protest, et cetera, I really understand that. But, at this point in my life, and John and I have talked about this, it's something that I'm going to be a part of, because it's what I have left to give. And John is out there week after week at rallies and what have you. It's what I have left to give. And I see the young people that are saying, so what's the difference between the tea and the window? I can't make that difference.
Right.
I can't make that difference.
It's only small things we can, I thought that in 2000, the year of Gore versus Bush, I was in bed when they were counting all the things. And I said to myself, I will never, ever be in my bed on election night in California. Right. Because even though I'm a small person, I have to do something. And I have to go. And so every election, I have been out working in a minor role, for me. But I've been to Ohio, I've been to New York, I've been to New York, Philadelphia, and Virginia, and Washington, and North Carolina on election periods. And I was telling Cheryl the other day, if we don't get through this now, I'll be out there again, because I understand that what a lot of don't understand, that elections matter.
They matter.
Matters.
They matter.
Nothing else you can get to the group that is here.
Right.
Elections matter, and you need to do what you can to make sure that the greater percentage of people understand that and participate. That's because right. This elections determine how people will live for the next 50 years. Now we're past that part for our 50 years, but we have been impacted by the Eisenhower period and the Reagan period, you know, and the Carter period. Carter period was great for me as a lawyer. Right. Bill Clinton was great for me as a lawyer. Bush wasn't so bad, you know, but this guy now is terrible. But it ain't so much for me now, it's for the next generation.
That's exactly right.
So that's the part that is most disturbing, that people must appreciate that there's a reason why you vote. Right. And the reason why they do not want you to vote. As a kid, I thought everybody got to vote. Then it turned out that I become an adult. Oh no, they don't want everybody to vote. And just look at what the Supreme Court just did this last week, when he says that even though you served your time in Florida, unless you paid all the fines, you still cannot vote.
That's correct.
That's 1 million and certain people, most of those people.
That's right. Let me just say this real quick. I know we've got to run, but you know, John just made a point that I think is really an important point to make here. Ironically, for George Woods and his family, this is probably the best time in our lives. Right? This is a good time. The coronavirus has kept me from traveling. My wife is so happy she can't hardly stand it. Right?
I wish you could say that to my wife. She's still
But you know what? If that's good enough for me, then I got a problem. The fact that it is so good for me, it's not the issue. Right? Okay. And if you can't move past who you are and how it is for you, and realize that quickly it can change.
Yes.
We've seen it with the Japanese in World War II. It's not like it's been quickly, it can change. So you got to move.
On that note, that has given me some chills, because it brings back so many memories and a clarity of understanding about particular things. I want to highlight Lynn Marie, who is leading a food bank here in Oakland. She writes with her team, "Thank you for all of your insightful opinions. You covered a lot of topics to consider. I appreciate the talks of teaching children to think and self-discipline." Yeah, it's really about our capacity to lead, and that means making decisions, owning our own inherent power, and we don't know what that is if we don't go inside. Right. And what you two do through your own communication, which is quite remarkable. You talk about the good, the bad, the ugly. What you do is you're also in reflection mode. You don't assume that you know what you need to know for tomorrow. You're in a growth phase. And the power of us as humans is to be in that growth space on a regular basis. You're going to say something, John, as a summary note?
I concurring what you had to say.
Yeah. So I want to say to everyone who's on this Lead Live broadcast at this moment, and those who are going to view it on podcast later, because it's going to be available 24/7, as long as the internet allows for access. I want you to remember some of the seminal truths that were shared here today. And one of the key things is the nature of your mindset is absolutely invaluable. The understanding that you can grow through textbooks, through partnership with others, through engagement is powerful. And you're always choosing. Even when you think someone is chosen for you, you've chosen to accept their decision. You get to lead wherever you're at all times, even if you're behind cells. As George has worked with countless number of individuals, their transformation from that 16, 17, 18-year-old who created ridiculous crimes into the adult that they are right now, where they're thinking, how in the heck did I do that? they've grown over time. They've taken the time, and they're investing in talking to individuals like Dr. Woods and others. In the same way that people leverage Attorney Burris, they will leverage you as you have increasing levels of clarity. Whether you're moving up the ladder to be a CEO of a corporation, an executive of your own business, or an elder in the community, whether it's in a farm community, whether it is in a village, whether it is in a bustling city, we all have responsibility more than just, as George conveyed it better than me, ourselves. The degree to which we pay it forward ensures the next generation is not only here, can actually be healthier and in a more rewarding state. So I agree. Vote, 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 vote. Even if you think your vote doesn't count, vote anyway.
Right.
Study issues to vote. And even if you think you're wasting an hour, use that hour anyway. You've not lost anything. And the potential for major gain for the rest of us and those future generations is invaluable. Wow. Thank you, George and John. I know I could have you on here all day long and then more. So I appreciate you taking special time that you made. You didn't necessarily have it, you made time here. And in the future, maybe at the end of the year, next year, after the elections, if you're open, I'd love to ask you to come back if you're available.
Sure. Absolutely.
Wonderful. I want to remind people that you can go to leadlivenow.com, leadlivenow.com, in order to sign up to get regular information about upcoming shows, see the calendar as it's being developed, get more details about the specifics, learn where to go for podcasts, etc., and be part of those who receive free ebooks that's about leadership and mindset in particular. And be tuned to next week. Next week, Jet, if you can pull it up, we have a guest, another remarkable man, John Bean, who has built a legacy, again, in Oakland, California. I know you think we're just focusing on Oakland. Oakland is magical. You got to visit when you can in the future if you're not here. And yet we'll have individuals from across the planet on this show. But next week we have John Bean, and John Bean is bringing one of his previous students, Kevin Parker. You want to hear this story. And we talked earlier about a Netflix show. Well, there's a new Netflix show, and it's called Last Chance U. It's on Netflix now, and it's about what John Bean and his team of coaches and current students are doing. That's more than just the game of football. Just pay attention. And so you're going to gain some additional insight, and we welcome your questions. Come, join us. Thank you again.